coming of the Pink Cheeks. So essentially what this is it's a story of an African tribe and the coming of what they call the Pink Cheeks. The Pink Cheeks are the British, and this is a time of the later time of colonialism, in which the British are in regions of Africa. And so essentially what the story is, and what the takeaway is you have these people who have lived for centuries and generations and years on their own land, and it becomes passed down, and it is almost seen like this land of theirs, it's not really anybody's land, it's the people's land, and they every generation reciprocates, and they keep going, and they keep holding this land together. And it starts by the Pink Sheets coming down and saying that suddenly, without any sort of talking or discussion, that the King of Britain is now their king, and they're all subjects of it. And in doing so, that land that was theirs is apparently the Crown's now. And because they are subjects of the king, they now have access to this land as well. So it has already, from the very start of it, when the Pink Cheeks show up, it has already gone from their land being theirs to now it's no longer their land, and they're being lended it. So it already, this has been such a monumental moment that they've taken away these people's land that is more than just land to them. And so we're going to see, as this develops, that this becomes a reoccurring theme, that the individual that is giving this story speaks several times that the young generations and the young children will no longer have that land, like, because of how important that land is to their people. So essentially what ends up happening is his youngest brother, his being the storyteller, his youngest brother goes off to fight World War One. And in a war, he says that the Pink Cheeks started to fight other Pink Cheeks, and comes back missing a hand, I believe, and ends up being the spokesperson for like a mediator between their tribe and the British. And it's this story is so interesting that it just shows like this steady and rapid depreciation almost of these people's culture, because they all started with taking away this land, and now their elders have no power because they've already taken that away, and they've created this own mediator for them. Even though it's one of their own people, it no longer is that power resting in their hands. They've taken it away from them. So then they have come and they've destroyed the ecosystem here. There's no longer any trees, and the land they once were able to thrive and prosper off of due to mediation and balance is now destroyed because the trees are gone, and there's droughts, and there's no more rain. And so you basically have the steady destruction of this culture, and it's quite terrifying, because I'm sure there were instances of slavery, but this is so much more. I mean, not so much more. I mean, slavery is still awful, but you have the destruction of an entire culture because the land is gone. And as he says several times in the story, the children are learning of God and not their own deities, and they're saying, the preachers in their schools are saying that God is above the deities they've been previously told about. So the Pink Cheeks are taking away from them everything that was. And towards the end of the story, it ends in a very solemn note, because you see that the people are now starving and there's no food. And there was a really interesting quote. They had said that when they were meeting under the tree to speak to the to have the representatives speak to the governors about getting land, one of the elders says, we can ask them to lend the land to us that we lent to them. And it just shows how convoluted and backwards the whole situation is about these poor people and the loss of their land to the British. And so I just think that the big takeaway from this whole story should be that while there's a lot who know about slavery and horrible things that happened in Africa during the land rush and post land rush during the time of colonialism, there was an even larger issue at hand where whole people and whole tribes were losing culture and land they had for, we're talking thousands of years, generations of people who had this land and treated it well. And I think it just serves as a massive metaphor for how the world started to move with the advent of newer technologies and the forgetfulness of and the loss of respect of what existed in the world before the time of, you know, industrialism. And that's the first portion I'm going to talk about. The next portion I'll talk about a few stories and poems. The next story I'll be talking about is called The Song of Luino, and it's a lament. So essentially what this story is it ties back into the last story I just was talking about. And it is this what I'm assuming to be a Ugandan woman is talking about her husband who has gone on this track that many youths that were talked about in the last story have gone on, and he has become, I guess you want to say, modernized in the English sense. And the story talks about how his wife is very proud of her way of her people and has learned all of their customs, even though her husband has said that she has a numb head and it is big but full of bones. And it is this point that you have to reflect upon, that you know, so many people witnessed this, and it wasn't even just the British doing it to these tribes people, it was their own tribes people doing it to each other, you know. And it's funny how in today's time you have the acceptance of, you know, there are black children who don't like their hair, and you know, it's because they grow up with dolls that have different hair than they do. And you know, it just shows that this is the start of where this comes from. And it's because this woman talks about how she can't do the things that white women do, and that although she can't, she doesn't long to be a white woman. She is proud of who she is. And just as if a white woman wouldn't want to have her hair, she doesn't want to have a white woman's hair. And I feel like this is such an important stance to take at such an early time, you know, when only just today is this becoming accepted, and people are being encouraged to accept who they are in their culture. And I just feel like it's just so sad because, you know, when you look at this story, she talks about a variety of things, about how he tells time, about how he says she doesn't cook like a white woman, how he says she doesn't look like one or dress like one or act like one, any of these things. But you know, she's telling him that although he thinks that she's this empty vessel that has no information because she's not educated like him in a different sense, you know, she still has tons of value and weight to what she knows, because what she knows is who she is. She hasn't changed and learned the culture of other people. She has learned her own culture and knows it well. And I feel like this story is so important to place right after the one we just talked about, because it is almost like a first person account for what it is like to deal with someone from your tribe who has become modernized in that sense that they have learned the culture of an entirely different people. And so this is the next story I talked about, and I just, you know, I really thought it related really well to the previous story, and it held a lot of weight for what it was trying to say. And I think it's trying to say that it is so hard for some of these people to still remain who they are and keep who they are amidst all the change that was happening during this time with the British, as we saw, and the colonies and colonists, as we saw at the last story. The next story I'll be talking about it's not really a story, it's more of like an address. It's called A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid. And so it's a really interesting way that this address approaches its topic. So it says "you" a lot in this piece, and when it says "you," I feel as if personally it's talking about, you know, the colonists who arrived to these colonies, these countries that were already pre-established, already had their own pre-established people, rules, religion, everything, and changed everything about it, and murdered and robbed these people of what their culture was and would be, and it still is today, but it's greatly tainted because of what happened. And so the author talks about how you, as I guess the colonizer, came and took what wasn't yours. They took the resources of the land. They took what was the land from their people. They took everything away from the people. And once the people rebelled, you as the colonizer left them. And it is in today's time that you judge them so for how they act and what they do. But in this piece, the author is saying that it is your fault for what they do, because they only know in their society what you brought. And the same things that they do in this time is the same things that we did in that time when we came in, and what the things that we instilled in them. And basically this piece is just really powerful about how take a second to reflect on yourself, because it is yourself that has caused these actions, and it is not themselves primarily. Although it is them, they willingly choose to make these choices. These choices exist because of what was instilled in them, and what the colonizers who came put and did in their land. And I believe that the takeaway from this is that before you judge something, look at the history and see what happened, and understand that the way they are isn't necessarily their fault. It may even be the fault of other people. The last piece I'll be talking about is called Gandhi is Fasting by Langston Hughes. At the time of writing this poem, Gandhi had been in prison with about like 20,000 other advocates for India's independence. And so essentially what the story is talking about is basically it's sending a message about how Britain should tremble because Gandhi is fasting, and he is sending this message that, regardless of what you want to do, it is wrong to beat and oppress the Indian people, and that many are Jim Crowed in India just as they are in the US, and that Gandhi doesn't serve as just the source of independence for Indians. It serves as this standing point for everybody who faces such oppression. And I believe this is a message that to Britain, that Gandhi can't be defeated, and this spirit of independence can't be defeated. And I think it's a really good way that this chapter ends on this story, because I think we see a trend where the first story is about how people lost their land and what caused it. The second story is about the personal view of what it's like to have someone so close to have this switch in them, and being proud of who you are still, regardless, in the face of all of this discrimination and hate for who you are. And then the next story, A Small Place, is almost like this understanding that it is your fault as the colonists, and it's not our fault for who we are and what we did, because you did this to us. And the last story, Gandhi is Fasting, I believe ties it all up, because it finally, you have this spirit of independence, and I won't be have my lands taken away. I won't be discriminated against. I won't be hated for who I am in my own land, in my own country. So I believe this is a great way to tie it up and end it. Because I believe it is finally this is a time period in which everybody understands this is wrong. Well, not everybody, but a large portion of people understand this is wrong, and I believe this is finally the end of it. And with that, we end the chapter on page 55. But I just wanted to say that the general trend of all of these stories is the loss of culture as a result of colonies and colonialism, and people from other lands giving you something you don't want and taking what they didn't ask for. And I believe we just need to all take away from this that there are so many horrible things that happened during this time period aside from slavery, and it is the destruction and loss of cultures. And many trends that we see today happening because of what colonists and other countries did, and it is not just a sad thing that happened in the past and let's leave it in the past. it is something we will see for many generations, and some of these cultures may not even ever have their land or their culture back entirely because it was destroyed and lost. And I believe, although it's a solemn note, I believe that in the 21st century, I think things are looking very up, and I think there's a culture of acceptance. And I hope that things like this really spread the message, and that one day it can all be accepted, and everybody understands one another and understands who was at fault and why it happened.